Tuesdays just keep coming. It's Tuesday again, and we're going to talk about the TOEFL because Tuesdays are now TOEFL Tuesdays. I'm Lucas from Magoosh, and I'm the TOEFL guy. And today we're going to talk about some grammar. Recently, I started by telling you about how and why you study TOEFL grammar. Today we're going to talk about a specific part of grammar, the subject and the verb. And you see this one here, that's because this is my first lesson on the subject and the verb. In future Tuesdays we will talk more about the subject and the verb because it's a big part of English grammar. It's a big part of grammar in every language. Now, the subject and the verb. What is the subject and what is the verb? The subject is the noun of the sentence or the clause, the main noun, like man, woman, child, chair, book, idea, thought, happiness, randomness. It can be any noun, really. Pronouns, it, that, wherever, and it can be just anything that acts as the topic thing. It can be a phrase sometimes, a whole noun phrase, or it can be just one word. The verb is very similar, except it is the verb. Run, swim, talk, think, believe, act, is. Those are all verbs, and also the verb of a sentence can be a whole phrase, a verb phrase. Let's take a look at some examples, starting with here. We've got hills and mountains. Now, if you start a sentence with this, hills and mountains, well, what's the subject? Is it hills or is it mountains? It's both. They are both the subject. So you can just say that this whole thing here is the subject. And I like to circle the subjects and underline the verbs. In the next sentence here, this one is a full sentence. Of course, hills and mountains is not a sentence, just a subject. In the next sentence, we have carbon dioxide in the air reacts with the rainwater. Now, what is the subject here? Carbon dioxide is a subject, and that helps. But really, some important advice when you're thinking about TOEFL grammar and thinking about the subject and verb when reading on the TOEFL. Don't just limit yourself to one word. The subject can be the whole phrase. And if you think about the subject like that, you will better understand the full sentence. So let's extend this circle here so it also includes in the air. Carbon dioxide in the air. Now let's treat that as the subject because we're talking about specific carbon dioxide here, not just any carbon dioxide, all carbon dioxide in the air. If it's not in the air, then it's not here. It's a different subject. And next, after that, we have the verb, and I want to again treat the whole phrase as the verb. Reacts with the rainwater, or at the very least, reacts with. Don't get stuck on reacts because there's so much more meaning happening later. So when you want to take a look at the subject and the verb, don't just go to a single word. Extend it. Let's take a look at some more examples. All right, here's a longer sentence. Lower mountains tend to be older and are often the eroded relics of much higher mountains. This is from a real TOEFL reading, so maybe you recognize this sentence. Maybe not. It's a difficult sentence. But let's take a look here. Lower mountains. That is our subject. Now, what is the verb? You might just say tend. Or maybe you want to say be. I really want to go with all of it. Tend to be, and that doesn't really give much information. I'll extend it further. Tend to be older. That gives us the real information, that whole phrase. And notice this word, and. What does that do? That makes more verb. And are often, and this is not a very informative verb, but it is a verb, are. And these two together tend to be older and are often, I'm just going to even go further, the eroded relics. This will be my two verbs. There can be two main verbs in a sentence. Don't get stuck on one word. So here we have lower mountains. That's the topic. But what do the lower mountains do? What do we want to know? What information do we want to know about those lower mountains? Well, they can be older, and those low mountains are older because they are the eroded relics. So erosion means that rain or wind knocks the mountains down and makes them lower, smaller mountains. So you get our main information from that subject there and the two verbs. This rest of this here of much higher mountains, it just adds more detail. It's not super important. The most important stuff is in the subject phrase and the verb phrases. And one more example for you. Hills that are referred to as mountains and their opposite, mountains called hills, are numerous. Notice what happened with the verb here. The verb is all the way at the end, and it's very, very small compared to a giant subject phrase. Hills is part of it, and their opposite is another. I really want to add all of this information because this qualifies hills. Which hills? Hills that are referred to as mountains. I don't mean all hills, I mean these specific hills. Similarly, I'm talking about their opposite, that is mountains which are called hills. Okay, so I'm really circling this whole sentence here as the subject, and at the end I have just the verb in two words. We can simplify this a little bit, but not by too much. We can simplify this by forgetting this mountains called hills, and instead look at hills that are referred to as mountains and their opposite. Those are the two subjects, and they can be very long as full phrases like this. That's how you break down a sentence into subject and verb, even if there are many subjects and many verbs, and even if the subject is a long phrase or the verb is a long phrase. Next time we'll talk a little bit more about getting lost trying to find the subject and where it can be in the sentence, and some more subject-verb tips. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next week. I'm Lucas. Happy studying.